Alrighty, guys. Solar seems to have no problem bopping Terrans. Spawning down the bottom left-hand side of the map. Spawning up in the top right-hand side of the map, it is Dead Pixel's FanTaSy. Awesome to see him getting supported. So now we'll just have to wait and see what the plan is for these two guys. I wouldn't be surprised if we see one or two cheeses. I mean, sort of cheesed in the last game. It ultimately didn't work. I mean, if he had managed to hold on, if he had gotten a spore back at home, it could have been a completely different game. And that FanTaSy would have eventually timed out and died due to being locked in his base. But FanTaSy, very well done, going for that counter harassment. It takes a lot of gonads to be able to just say, alright, yeah, I'm locked in my base, but I'm going to survive in this game by going for counter harassment. And he did that with that Liberator. It was a huge pain for Sort of, and then eventually Sort of tried to shut it down, but FanTaSy coming in with the 2 surprise Banshees. So now we'll just have to see who's going to be able to, take this. I mean, in theory, I think Solar wins on paper. Now, Solar has played a very sort of similar style. It's possible that FanTaSy may be able to do what Bunny didn't. He may be able to change things up a little bit. We'll have to see. He just played one TVZ best of 5. I wouldn't be surprised if Solar was watching that. Gotta turn off the music there. We are no longer in downtime. We are in the series. FanTaSy, interestingly enough, not SCV scouting, so maybe confident that Solar's not going to go for an early pool versus him on Lost and Found. He seems to change it up, maybe just enough to mind game his opponents into not doing that build, something along those lines. Reaper's moving in, sees that Overlord. Going on down, maybe just to try and catch the Lings. Okay, so he is playing it safe in case it is an early pool. Maybe confident that the Reaper won't get much done if it just went right across the map to Solar, which is very fair. Solar's a very good Zerg. Not likely going to lose any Reapers or anything early on. Well, lose any drones to a Reaper early on. Third base is on the way for Solar. Just going to be macroing on up. I wouldn't be surprised if we see him just try and hit that sort of 75 drone count. Lingbane Hydra eventually hit multiple places. Sort of tried that style once or twice. We could always see Mutas out of Solar as well. He made them work versus FanTaSy. I would like to see FanTaSy go for a proxy double or proxy 3 racks. Hellions are now on the way for FanTaSy. We haven't really seen him commit to a cloaked Banshee. He's getting up his tech lab though. It's a bit early to be starting a 3rd CC though, so I think we'll see. Could always be a cloaked Banshee. The way this is timing out, it very well could be. I think it will be. Either that or maybe a Raven. A Viking. Okay, maybe I'm completely wrong. Yeah. Stim starting. Okay, I was completely wrong. He's going to build a 3rd CC in a minute, make Hellions. Viking to deny scouting. Solar getting that Ventral Sax, if I'm not mistaken. Pneumatized Carapace, that's the one. I always called the Zerg speed upgrades the wrong thing. But here comes in this Overlord. The Viking should be able to kill it off here, but really will see what it needs to. Now, interestingly enough, Stim was cancelled here. Now, the tech lab that was started on this starport is going to basically shout out to Solar that, hey, I am going to be getting Stim. But he may just be floating this, there we go, he's swapping, yeah. He's going to be going for like a Marine Siege Tank attack, maybe make a Banshee. Marine Siege Tank Banshee. Maybe Liberator, actually it is going to be a Raven. Now we've got these Hellions moving across the map, and I like this. I like the fact that FanTaSy's going to be going for some aggression. I mean, it could always be a mech opening, the fact that he's going into a 3rd CC. Cancelling his Stim. So this is an interesting choice out of FanTaSy, maybe trying to mind game his opponent a little bit. The Viking trying to pick off his Overlord, I don't think it's going to be able to. But it is making sure that none get on this side of the map. There's a good number of Lings here, though, to shut this down. FanTaSy just poking and prodding. A lot of Lings are out for Solar. He needs to be careful. 23 Zerglings out. This Queen's actually taking a lot of damage. Nice grenade bounce means that he may be able to get to kill it. Does have to run back though. Hellion's taking a fair bit of damage. That Queen does survive. Yeah, it got transfused there at the end if I'm not mistaken. Yes, it did. So Reaper for 9 Lings trading so far. Nothing significant. Solar is floating a bit of money though. So maybe his larva was disrupted a little bit there. Yeah, Solar actually floating quite a bit of resources here. That's a little concerning. So is FanTaSy too. So we'll just have to see. FanTaSy could be playing mech here. I mean, he's making a lot of Marines. There we go. He is going to swap this over. Yeah, and mech it is. I'm glad to see that we are seeing FanTaSy change it up now. Solar is a very good player. So I'm sure he knows how to deal with mech. We'll just have to see what he's going to do. FanTaSy is moving out, though, interestingly enough, for a push. Maybe going to try and catch his opponent off guard with a bit of a unique timing here. A Ling does get in, though. Sees that it's going to be mech. Sees the army move out. So Solar is going to be well aware that this is coming right now. So FanTaSy not going to be too happy with that scout. I guess the depots were not raised in time there. Raven going to help clean up this creep. Hellbats are going to be here. Siege tanks as well. The good number of Marines are going to help buffer for this. But I think FanTaSy may just decide to pull back, force those units, and then retreat home. The Ling counterattack is going to be seen. The wall's actually not up there. So FanTaSy's going to have to pull back. He's morphing Hellbats. Is he going to complete the wall, or will the Lings get this around? They get this around on the Hellbats. I mean, Hellbat's still pretty good versus Zerglings, though. So they are going to buy time. Here comes in the Raven. The third base is up. 3 SCVs fall, but that's kind of acceptable. Solar did have a lot of units forced out of him. Now, well, we need to see FanTaSy get back on the production, though. He needs more siege tanks. It's actually going to be Thors here. Double Thor. Likely going to be double Medivac, then, if I had to guess. Going to be that Thor drop, as he's got the reactor on the starport. Will he be starting those Medivacs? May be able to wait a second, as, I mean, Thors do take longer to build than Medivacs. There's the double Medivacs. He is supply block, though, which is a bit concerning. But it should all still time out just fine. So it's going to be double Thor drop versus Solar. Now, I mean, these are something that can either go so good or so wrong. I mean, you're basically floating 1,200 resources towards your opponent, hoping that it'll do something. So you need to do a lot of damage with double Thors. And they always can. If it's just going to be Roaches defending, Roaches are slow. They can always be danced around. But looking at this, it's actually going to be Swarm Host out of Solar. And Swarm Host are very good versus mech. I mean, they used to be the answer to mech way back in the day. We all know, well, a lot of us know, Heart of the Swarm, mech versus Swarm Host stalemates. Then we sort of knew how Swarm Host kind of became very bad at dealing with mech, and now they're okay again. We now see this army is moving out, though, so FanTaSy's going to have to deal with this, but the real concern is the Swarm Host. When they get their first wave off, if this becomes a planetary fortress, it's going to be very concerning. We're now seeing a Baneling drop. Is FanTaSy going to react to this in time? Needs to pull the SCVs. He's not pulling the SCVs, though. The Banelings are popping out, but they actually just lock onto those Hellions there, but 9 SCVs do go down, which is quite a big loss. The Thors are now coming in. They should be able to bounce between the main base and the third. The Swarm Hosts are out, and so Roaches are not the best at dealing with Thors, so this is going to be a very good attack coming out of FanTaSy right now. These Thors are going to get some damage done. They shred drones. Now, he's going to have to dance around. This should just be focusing down the Roaches and dancing around. Getting on into the main base now, going to unload these Thors, possibly pick up that Hydra Den, which would be a very nice pickoff. Queen immediately goes down. Solar not really reacting to this quick enough. Thor's now firing on some of these Roaches there, picking some of those units off, which is very nice. Now, Solar is splitting his army, though, so these Thors won't be able to just easily bounce around. He's got a bit of damage done. Disrupting Solar is very nice. Now, the main concern, though, is these Swarm Hosts. It looks like they've already fired off a wave while this was going on. Now, they will have another in just a second, and it's going to be a very big army. Blue Flame is on the way, which will help immensely. Enough Hellbats can be the answer to deal with Locusts, as they just sort of shred through the Locusts before they get any damage done. Planetary Fortress is on the way at the fort. This one can be very exposed on this map versus Swarm Host. Here come in the Locusts, though. The Hellbats are there. Infernal Pre-Igniter is not done just yet, though. A Siege Tank's going to go down. Looks like another one will. We may actually be seeing 3 or 4 Siege Tanks go down. In fact, almost all of FanTaSy's Siege Tanks have gone down, as he doesn't quite have the critical mass to deal with them. Yeah, all the Locusts eventually get killed off, but they were pretty much going to expire anyway. The Thors are getting some good counter damage done, but question is it going to be enough? They may be able to cancel this base, which would be absolutely huge. Is FanTaSy going to drop him there? And he is. That's very nice to see. A Liberator's incoming as well. That requires a different kind of response from Solar. The Thors are now going to be able to get out. Yes, they are canceling the base. Very nicely done. May just be able to drop him again and pick it off. Look at this. Look at FanTaSy go. Actually kills off the base, which is a very nice pick off. Now, the Liberator is in position, so it is going to get shot at by these queens. So unfortunately, that's not going to get too much done. The Swarm Host firing out another wave. The siege tanks are a siege. But here comes in the Swarm Host. FanTaSy's got to react to this. He's now kiting back. The Hellbats are actually going to do immense damage versus this. So there we go. The Hellbats, yes, they are taking a lot of damage. Now, I'd like to see that. There we go. Now, the Swarm Hosts are forced back because the Thors are home. They could just be dropped on top of that army. Now we see Roach is going to be going for a counterattack at the 4th base. There is a siege tank. There's lots of missile turrets going down. FanTaSy is aware of this threat. Swarm Hosts are one of these things. They can either snowball so good, or they can just be dealt with by, like, nothing. Now, as FanTaSy maxes out, it will be tougher for Solar to get damage done with these Swarm Hosts. For now, though, he is working away on these rocks, but there's plenty of siege tanks. There's a planetary. This army will be forced back. Loses a Roach or two to those siege tanks. As if we do look up at the upgrades, it's 2-2, and Mech, once it hits 3-3, is very strong here. And FanTaSy is heading towards that. I mean, it'll help immensely when dealing with Swarm Hosts. These Swarm Host Vikings are working away on them. They're just going to land right on the middle of these siege tanks, and they're actually going to kill off so many. 3 siege tanks going down there. These Swarm Hosts paying for themselves very effectively here. Vipers are in position too, though, so it's hard for FanTaSy to be able to move out and punish this. Ghosts are on the way. Not sure how well that's going to help. I mean, it's really just got to be a lot of Hellbats in position to deal with this good tank position to deal with the Swarm Host. Maybe a Liberator or two would help immensely. Thor Splash is pretty good versus the Locust too. Now, if we look at Solar's bank, though, it does tell a story. I mean, the Zerg tends to max out on drones quicker, so they tend to have the much better economy moving forward. And Solar's on 5 bases now. He did take a bit of harassment damage, but for now he just made his set of units and he's sticking with them. He'll eventually spend his bank on something else. Anti-armor missile goes down on these, so they're just going to get shredded. But these siege tanks almost killing a Thor. Good pickup, though, by FanTaSy, making sure that Thor doesn't get killed by the friendly fire. But it's taking a lot of time and effort for FanTaSy and able to be able to deal with this. And I mean, this is the first game in the series. We're already 12 minutes in. Here comes in an attack, though. The Vipers are coming in. They're going to abduct the 2 siege tanks. Missile turret actually kills off one of the Vipers, so not without consolation there. An engineering bay maybe going down there, but it does stay alive for now. Getting up that high-sec auto-tracking to help those missile turrets out. Going to be getting up building armor as well, which will help immensely. Very good for dealing with the Locusts. Now, FanTaSy's got this very scary army, and in a head-on-head fight, it will win versus whatever Solar has, but the concern is he ever going to get that chance? Solar, pardon me, there it goes again. Solar is a Zerg player who does a fantastic job with keeping your opponent occupied, with preventing them from doing what they want to do. But FanTaSy may just be saying enough. He's just going for it right now. Solar going to be trying to buy time right now with this army, but this is going to be a 3-3 mech army relatively soon pushing forward. And that's going to be a pretty big concern for this player. The Swarm Hosts are in position to send out another wave. There's a lot of ghosts here for FanTaSy. It has really been producing them, but the counter damage could be big here. The Locusts aren't really controlled though, so they will land. They will kill off these siege tanks, but they shouldn't be able to get the planetary there. So FanTaSy, I think, does just need to keep on pushing. Ghosts get massive snipes on all these Swarm Hosts, though. A few more snipes can go down. Picking those off. Needs to get out of there with those Ghosts, though. Can't afford to lose them. Does lose 1 Ghost, but that was a nice pickoff. Swarm Hosts are pretty cheap, though, but these Ghosts, they need to get moving. Another Ghost goes down there. Raven actually gets picked off, too. That's absolutely huge. That Raven was such an effective tool for FanTaSy, and now we're seeing Corruptors on the way. So while FanTaSy's got this very great army, we're going to have to see if he's able to get anything done with it. He's now pushing out, but picking off a Swarm Host or 2 is not enough to warrant the way that Solar is playing FanTaSy. FanTaSy needs to be able to move out and get some damage done, but he's in a very rough situation right now. Lots of Ghosts are out on the map here. FanTaSy, he's got up to 5th base now. Well, he's going to want to get that into a planetary. He wants to move out. He needs to keep Solar busy at this point. You want to be the player that's making the moves. He's got a good number of Ghosts. He's got some Hellbats. But, what else is FanTaSy making? He's making a lot of Ghosts, but, I mean, he's playing mech. Should he be making a lot of ghosts, or should he be going into something else? It's tough to call because every player plays mech differently and every Zerg reacts to it differently. Right now, Solar does seem to be doing a good job dealing with it. We're seeing a Locust Wave hitting this base. It wasn't a planetary, though, so it can lift off. There's a lot of these ghosts in position. The Queens are going down. FanTaSy is now pushing forward. He's got all these siege tanks. There's only 2 Vipers here. The choice is going to be Broodlords, though, to deal with this, but Thors are good versus Broodlords. Snipes can go down on some of this army. A lot of these units are getting sniped away. Now, is FanTaSy aware of all these morphing Broodlords, though? That is the question. He's setting up these tanks once more. Thors are very good versus Broodlords, mainly because Broodlords don't have a lot of upgrades at this stage. They've got 1-1, which is actually better than a lot of Zergs have at times, but it is going to be a lot of Broodlords, so not likely going to be enough to deal with this. FanTaSy needs to know that there is Broodlords on the way. They're all sort of just hanging out at the third base of Solar. FanTaSy wants to push in. He sees the Broods, so that may make him hesitate a bit. He's got the Ghost, so he can snipe on the Broods. The Thors are going to want to transform into their single high-impact payload mode, and then we'll see what FanTaSy's making. Vikings and Thors are on the way. He's even getting transformation service. He's going to be going for a drop, but decides against it. Doesn't really want these Thors to be seen and killed, I suppose. And FanTaSy does pull off, but he's got up this 5th base. He's securing it. And as long as he has the 5th base, he's not in a terrible situation. This Thor needs to get out of here, though. It looks like it may just have been a sacrifice by FanTaSy to Solar. That's a pretty expensive loss there. FanTaSy now doing what he needs to do. Try and pull Solar out of position. The Broodlords, though, have been moved to the right location. SCV, the Warrior SCV, is fighting on the front lines. I'm not sure if he's too happy with that job duty. Roach is picking off some, I believe, a sensor tower, picking off some missile turrets. Nicely done. Now, while looking at the banks, FanTaSy's maxed out, building a bank. Solar maxed out, has a very large bank. Looking at all these Broodlords, though, there's kind of a rule of thumb as to how you deal with air, and I think the choice that FanTaSy needs right now is he needs more Vikings. He needs more Ravens and things like that, because with this many Broodlords, it's very tough to deal with this on the ground. But snipes are going down. It's already thinning out a few of them. Ghosts for Broodlords is something that I guess FanTaSy can afford for now. He's forced to turn around and fight, though, and this might not be the best location for him. Snipes have gone down on a few of these units so far. A few of these Broodlords are all just 1 snipe away from going down. More Broodlords are being morphed, and look at this. This is cutting into the Corruptor count, so this is why I think that FanTaSy needs more Vikings. Snipes going down on a lot of these units. They're all so weak, but it's tough to get the double snipe off on the same Broodlord. There's only 4 Vikings for now to deal with this. More are coming in, though. Here comes FanTaSy. The Hydras are doing immense damage onto this air army, though. FanTaSy needs to manage to hold on right now. He's got these tanks sieged up. They're chipping into some of these Hydras. A lot of the Ghosts have gone down. The Vikings now, with the Thor support, may be able to push forward. And I think some SCVs need to be pulled to repair. Some more Hellbats maybe need to be made as well to chew through those. SCVs have been pulled. Right now, FanTaSy is holding on. If we look at the resources lost, it's relatively even, so it's not really favoring either player for now. And FanTaSy does have a very good army. If you look at the army value, it is higher for Solar for now, though. Just these Broodlords, such expensive units. FanTaSy with so many Thors, though. FanTaSy looking to secure another base, moving in. He's making more Ghosts. He's getting +3 ship weapons, which is good to see. He's making a lot of Vikings, and this is the choice that I believe that FanTaSy needs. He needs a lot of Vikings. Thors are very good, but looking at this army for Solar, look how many Broodlords there are. There's 14. There's going to be up to 17 in a second here. It's tough to beat that from the ground. FanTaSy needs to fight this from the air, in my opinion. Although he's been doing a very good job with the Ghosts and Thors so far. So he's managing to make it work. And Solar, the fact that most of his army is in the air, as long as FanTaSy fights around him, he could be in a very good situation. But Solar, his air units are looking very tough as he is heading in towards 3-3, which is very nice to see from his Zerg player. The fight could be happening right now, and I'm not sure if FanTaSy can take this one. There is just far too many Broodlords. Anti-armor missile goes down in these Corruptors, so these Vikings will be able to work on them. However, the Thors are rather unsupported now. There's so many Hydras, so I think that Solar may be taking the first game right now. FanTaSy is forced back. He's got a lot of supply, but I believe most of it's in production right now. A nuke is being launched here. There's a Ghost that says, get out of here, but I'm not sure if the Ghost is going to hang on. More Ghosts are moving forward. Is the Ghost going to go down, or is the nuke going to land? The nuke does get denied. Solar, so ballsy, just moving forward. saying, yeah, I can deal with this, and now just this army. FanTaSy, doesn't matter how many Thors, how many Ghosts, I think he just needed maybe some Liberators, maybe some Vikings in order to deal with this, as it's simply just so many Broodlords. It's just impossible to deal with. So here comes in Solar once more. He's pushing in, and this time I don't think FanTaSy is going to be able to push him back. There's a lot of Thors for FanTaSy, but I don't think he has enough Thors. There's just too many Broodlords. Yeah, smaller numbers Thors are actually surprisingly good versus Broodlords, but this is not enough. There's some Ghosts. The Vikings are there. Most of the Corruptors have been turned into Broodlords, but there's enough coming back here. The Thors are trying to hang on, but just looking at this, I think it's just too much. The Vikings eating a lot of damage. More Vikings on the way. 7 at a time. FanTaSy realizes that he needs to be able to win the air fight in order to come back in this game, but it's just a little bit too late, and this is honestly going to be a little bit demoralizing for FanTaSy. I mean, you had the late game mech composition, and you just got to think, what could I have done better? Maybe some more harassment, something along those lines, but this is just so many Broodlords. Solar is saying, yeah, most Zergs may make 7 or 8 Broodlords. I'm making 14. Deal with it. Plus 3 ship weapons finishing, but I think it's too little too late. FanTaSy does have the space in the bottom right. He's got these other bases still standing strong, so he's not hopelessly broke or anything yet. Solar is dealing more and more damage to him, though. FanTaSy, it's possible he can come back in this game, but it's pretty rough, the situation. So many Broodlings just shooting out of these Broodlords. It's ridiculous. Right now you see more Vikings being produced. There's not really any Vipers, to my knowledge. Well, there's 2 somewhere. And those are actually going to be huge, because FanTaSy has made a lot of Vikings wherever they are. Well, actually, I guess most of them died there. The Thors are now trying to do their best. Snipes going down on these Broodlords. They've been thinned out a bit, but there's still 11 of them. The Thors get blinding clouded, and now they're going to be forced to run once more. And I think it's still just a bit too much. There's not enough on the ground to thin out the Broodlings, and look at this, Solar making even more. FanTaSy just doesn't have quite enough. He just didn't take the Broodlord threat seriously enough when he had the resources to do so, and now he does not have the resources to do so. It's just a slow death for FanTaSy. It's a best of 7, so it may just be best for him to say, alright, yeah, I could drag this out, but maybe I should be thinking about the next game. And there we go. Solar takes the first game, and he wants to retain his crown. He wants to set that new record. The current record holder, to my knowledge, is a Laser, but Solar's looking pretty damn unbeatable, regardless of who I put in the tournament. So, it's not over yet, though. Next map is Dreamcatcher. I really respect FanTaSy for playing mech. Maybe he needs to experiment with it a bit more, and he'll be able to beat Solar that way, but that was a very tough loss for him. As he did have all the resources, and it can feel bad as a meching player when you say, alright, I've got all these units, but I still can't address the Zerg force, so I think it's just that FanTaSy, yeah, it's tough committing to a lot of Vikings, but he needed the Vikings sooner, and by the time he was producing them, he was just bleeding them out so many. The resources lost at the end. FanTaSy was very far behind. But thanks everyone for tuning on in. Feel free to follow me on Twitter. Feel free to leave a 1 up for the stream. And here we are. Both these guys are ready. We're going to be getting on into it. That was the first game in this best of 7, so we've got a lot more good StarCraft to come. Whether we'll see more mech is a different question or not, but I have a feeling we won't see it on Dreamcatcher. Anyway, this Zerg currently with the lead, spawning down the bottom right. It is Solar. And his opponent up in the top left, it is Dead Pixels FanTaSy. So we'll just have to see what he's going to do this game. I mean, I'm trying to think back. That was a long time ago, that game. That was a almost 25-minute game, or 23-minute game or so. So, how did that game open up? I mean, FanTaSy poking with the Hellions and whatnot. Nothing too major. He went for the Thor drop with the double mech. Got a bit of damage done, but I guess maybe the Swarm Host did a bit too much damage, sort of forced FanTaSy to make a set of units. I mean, Thors are very good versus Broodlords, but only up to a point. When you're out on the map and if you can take a fight out on the map, Broodlords or Thors work very good versus Broodlords. But when you're being chipped away at by the Zerg, you need the Vikings. The Ghosts were a good call, but I guess they didn't manage to kill off enough of the Broodlords. So now we'll just have to see, what is FanTaSy going to do? FanTaSy GG timing. That may be a bit right. Alright, apparently I can't follow that Overlord because he's just staying at home to scout. This one, on the other hand, not much else to see in the game so far. FanTaSy, not SCV scouting. Going out for that Reaper. I mean, the fact that FanTaSy managed to beat Sort of is very nice. Shows that he's at a pro level once again, as Sort of is a very good Zerg player. Now Reaper on the way, Marine follow-up, just to be safe, just to shoo away the Overlord. We'll see if the Reaper goes right across the map or waits. The Reaper will be waiting. Looks like it's going to be a Hellion opening once again. I doubt we'll see Mech as it is Dreamcatcher. I mean, Mech is very good. Tanks can stay behind these blockers, but once the Zerg gets to Vipers, the Abducts are very good on Dreamcatcher. Overlord gets sent back. FanTaSy scouting out with his Reaper, playing it very safe here. I think the next game, I would like to see a Proxy 2 Rex out of FanTaSy. It's time. This is our third TVZ. We had a 3-0 and then we had a 3-2. It's our 8th, 9th. It's our 10th TVZ match today in a row. So I think it's time. I think it's time we see a Proxy 2 Rex, right? McTaren's got to bring it out every now and then. FanTaSy poking in and out with a Reaper. Hellions and Reaper poking in. All poking around. Not diving out to Solar's side of the map just yet. Vikings on the way. Solar not going for that, I'm not even gonna say. He's not going for the quick Overlords. Pneumatized Carapace. That's it. I'm saying it. He's not going for that upgrade. The Viking is out. Ling gets denied trying to scout. Now, FanTaSy did see the Overlord to the south, so you should be looking for that. We'll see if he's able to find it. Roach Warren on the way for Solar. So that's a bit of a tell. Solar may be wanting to go for some aggression. Solar is a guy who's certainly capable of it. Shutting down that creep tumor is very nice for FanTaSy. Another one goes down immediately. Roach Warren and a lair on the way means that this could be a Nidus. It could be like a +1 Roach Flood across the map. We'll just have to wait and see. FanTaSy, on the other hand, though, is actually changing it up a bit. He's going for a 2-base this time, which is going to be very good for dealing with these Roaches. Now, Solar hasn't really seen what FanTaSy's up to. Maybe he's guessing there's no 3rd base, and that's why he's going for the Roaches. They're really going to be for safety. Drones being on the way, Roach speed on the way. So I guess these are safety Roaches, as opposed to anything aggressive. I guess Solar reading into the fact that FanTaSy is going to be putting on the pressure. FanTaSy will be able to hit a pretty strong timing here, though, with these siege tanks. The Zergling did see the edge of that army, though, so I think Solar is aware that he needs to be prepared here. FanTaSy waiting for the Medivacs before he moves out, I believe. Hellion's looking for that Zergling. Now, we're going to see. FanTaSy, this attack is known. Solar's reacting to it. You don't get to be as good as Solar without being able to sniff out timings like this. Medivacs picking up the siege tanks. Now we see a Ling counterattack potentially moving out. Those medivacs all being loaded up into the siege tanks. Ling's catching these Marines. They do win that trade though. Now FanTaSy moving forward, but he doesn't have the siege tanks with him just yet. So he's going to have a tough time poking in. +1 is going to be done, so there'll be that upgrade advantage for FanTaSy. Siege tank's getting set up behind the blockers. Now he's going to take a fight. Solar maybe overstepping a little bit, eating a fair bit of damage there. Now it's the Stim Bio. Now these roaches, they're still at that level in which they're pretty tanky here. So FanTaSy just trading just versus them with the bio is a little rough right now. The siege tank's doing a lot of damage to these roaches. Corrosive bile is going down on the siege tanks though, but there is enough of the tanks. One of the tanks does go down, but the question is, I think Solar is going to be able to consolidate here, and FanTaSy is going to be pushed back, and FanTaSy is still on 2 bases, so he's going to have to just keep committing, keep hoping to make this work. No Marauders there might have been the reason why this attack failed, and now Solar, he's hanging on. FanTaSy's forced to take an expansion, but that's not a good feeling as the Terran player. Going for a 2 base and failing, then saying, I guess I'll macro. I think FanTaSy needs to be going for some drops out on the map. Solar now going for Tunneling Claws and Burrow, which is a very nice move. I mean, just the scans alone can cost the Terran a great deal with Burrow, and then Tunneling Claws with Roaches can be an absolute nightmare. These tanks are always exposed to missile turrets starting, interestingly enough. So FanTaSy maybe sniffing this out a bit. Maybe just thinking there's roaches, that means I need to build a turret. Roaches picking off those rocks there. +1 is on the way for FanTaSy. Well, +1 armor. Solar getting 1-1 as well, so these guys will be relatively equal on the upgrades. I think FanTaSy may be able to move out at some point relatively soon. Dropping a lot of mules, taking us 3rd base. And he's got a decent siege tank count. Now the question is, will the Burrowed Roaches allow Solar to pull a fast one on FanTaSy? Sort of going behind the army or something like that. As the army supply isn't too far apart, and FanTaSy's got a very good army. It's an army that definitely needs to be used to push at this point in the game. A Burrowed Roach sharking around, gonna scout out that 3rd base. FanTaSy unsieging, it's time for him to go. A Roach counterattack from Solar could be very rough here. Viking finds an Overlord, was going to be an Overseer, I believe, maybe a Dropper Lord. Now, FanTaSy's moving out. We'll see if Solar's going to do anything with these Burrowed Roaches. Could be Burrowed Banelings as well. Scan goes down. FanTaSy moving in towards the 3rd. This is a fantastic location for siege tanks. And this, when Zergs say they're scared of Dreamcatcher, this is part of the reason why. As look at all these siege tanks. This is so many tanks getting set up for FanTaSy. It's going to be very tough for Solar to break this. A counterattack is going on back at home, but FanTaSy's focusing on the now with this attack. Ravager's getting some Corrosive Biles off on the tanks. Some of them were not sieged up, but FanTaSy baiting Solar into this concave and is now going to stim forward. Fantastic move by FanTaSy, just deciding to go for this attack. And I think he may be able to tie this series up and kill Solar here. He's taking a lot of damage at his 3rd base, so really he does need to kill his opponent right now. As Solar is teching up further, FanTaSy, he's taking a lot of damage. He needs to just keep moving forward. Now he's not going to have as good of a position to sort of dictate the fight this time, but he's going to load into these medivacs and maybe go into the main base, it looks like. Solar is going to react to this. FanTaSy unloading here, maybe a little bit ambitious with this play, baiting the Zerg into this, but he's also sort of landed on top of the Banelings here. FanTaSy may need to pick up once again. I think that was a bit of an over-ambitious play. Loads up into the medivacs, but bleeds off a lot of supply. And I think with that Solar may be able to hold on. FanTaSy is unloading, though. These Ravagers are still eating a few siege tank shots, but a good Baneling connection there helps deal with what's dropping in the bio. And FanTaSy's attack was cleaned up. He did kill off the base of Solar, so Solar now down a base, but FanTaSy also down a lot of mining time. Liberators are set up at the 3rd base. FanTaSy's got a good chunk of bio left over. Some roaches are being pursued away. We need to see a missile turret up at the third base for FanTaSy. A stim going down is actually catching these roaches, which is a very big deal. It gets them all very nicely done for FanTaSy. That's going to even up the supply. And when we're talking about the supply, Solar's going into an Ultralisk here. A single supply worth of Ultra... Well, a 6 supply worth of Ultralisk, technically, but a single unit. Now, the question is, how's Solar going to deal with this? This is a very strong Terran army. He's even got Liberators in the fray now. Burrow is always a potential comeback move, but Solar has not been thinking about those burrowed Banelings. Now, FanTaSy moving out in the middle does make me a bit worried because that is going to give Solar room to get things off like burrowed Banelings are a nice attack. FanTaSy is opting to go for this gold base, though. He needs to siege these tanks right now. There we go. And now he's going to be moving in. There's the one Viper. There's the one Ultras. The Liberators are getting set up. It might be a little bit too late for the Liberators. Lots of Crocodile is going to go down. Picks off all but one of the Liberators, though, so there's really no answer to that. FanTaSy is kiting back. This one Ultra doing so much damage here. The Liberator dealing tons of damage itself, though. FanTaSy pushing forward once more. Scans, sees all the creep there, but this Ultralisk is worth its weight in gold. It's just so strong right now. FanTaSy is kiting back. There's not too much of an answer for these Liberators. Liberators getting set up right now, baiting or sort of pushing Solar back. Reinforcements for FanTaSy coming from the north. A little bit caught off, though. Crocodile is going down, picks off one of those Liberators. FanTaSy dealing some damage, though, but he's taking so much damage back at home. These Marauders are cutting back to the rest of the ability. The Medivacs are very weak, but they are healing the spy. They are keeping it going. And it looks like Solar has bled off a lot of supply. FanTaSy is ahead in the supply, and now he's forced to abandon this gold base here. FanTaSy took a lot of damage at his third base. His economy is not very good, but neither is Solar. Solar does have his own third base, though, and is mining, but looking at the tech, I mean, it's, soon it's going to be 2-2 for Solar, and he's going to have adrenal glands, which means his army is going to be much superior to that of FanTaSy. FanTaSy has... He's got the Zerg... Well, he's going to have the Zerglings, and he's going to have the adrenal glands, which is going to be huge. FanTaSy starting 2-2. Maybe a little worried that he's going to fall behind in the upgrade front, as these Ultras are going to be very tough when they have an upgrade advantage, when they have this chitinous plating. It is just one Ultra once again, but that thing is an absolute unit compared to what FanTaSy has. Here we see some Liberator harassment on top of this. There's really no Hydras or anything to deal with this, though, so as long as FanTaSy moves the Liberator, he shall be fine. Nicely done there. And this is actually a pretty big deal. This is why the Liberators have found a lot of success for FanTaSy. Needs to be careful, though. Can't really siege up. Solar's on point with this. FanTaSy sees that Solar's taking this gold base to the right. He's going to go drop it. He's got another drop moving into the main base. Drop at this gold. I think this gold's days are going to be short-lived, but Solar is going in towards the fourth base. Now this drop, FanTaSy may be able to pick up some of these Banes, but we'll be forced to get out of there. Loads up into the Medivac. So getting a little trade here and there, cleaning up some creep, but Solar is now on 4 bases. FanTaSy dropping into the main base here, trying to get anything he can. If he can get a Viper, that would be huge. Needs to be careful and get out with this Medivac, though. It's getting very low. He can unload in the natural here. Baneling's rolling forward. FanTaSy needs to lift up and get out of there. The lack of anti-air is really paining Solar now. That's why he's going into Aspire. A fifth base is actually on the way for Solar, so he's very confident in this macro this game. And I mean, FanTaSy still is on 3 bases. His income is dropping. He's on 40 workers. He's up in the army supply by a great deal, though. And he's going to have 2-2 in just a minute, so this could be FanTaSy's time. He's going to have to lift up and get out of there. Maybe overstaying his welcome a little bit too long. Gonna try and deny mining at the 4th base. He sees the 5th base now. So now he has his target. And looking at the army of FanTaSy, this is a game-ending army here. These guys have had a lot of skirmishes. The Liberator's baiting out Crocodiles. One of them goes down there. But these are a lot of siege tanks. This is a lot of stim bio. There's really not much that can prevent the mobility of this army here. The siege tanks getting set up. The Liberators once again. FanTaSy coming in on this position on Dreamcatcher, and he's going to kill the base. And it looks like he may be able to kill the 5th base as well. He's already cancelled it or killed it, it looks like. Now he's got to deal with the Ling run by from Solar. So FanTaSy, well, he himself has had a very poor economy. He's forcing Solar back onto a bad economy as well. This Viking, once again, seeing another gold base being started. He's just the watching eye of FanTaSy. Corruptors are out now, though, which is going to make it much, much tougher for FanTaSy to deal with this. FanTaSy, though, still is up on supply. We'll see if it's enough to overcome the composition deficit and the sort of tech deficit. I mean, there's the Vipers, there's the Ultralisks, and that's always pretty scary for a Terran player to deal with. FanTaSy has so many Marauders, though. Liberators are going to need to get sieged up. FanTaSy's sort of being surrounded here. This is a massive attack right now. Some siege tanks are not firing, but this army just got collapsed upon. There's lots of army for FanTaSy coming in from the north, though. This bio is coming in, and Solar tried to go for the attack, but it might not have been enough. This Liberator dealing massive damage, allowing one of those Ultras to be picked off. Vipers are going down, which is a very nice pickoff. Those are costly units. FanTaSy's being forced back, though. He lost all his medivacs, and looking at the supply, it's equal on army supply now, though FanTaSy had a lead, but that's now gone. He's going for a bit of harassment. He's unloading in the main base of Solar, which is nicely done if he can pull him in. He needs to start killing these workers immediately, though, and he's going to do just that. Gets on top of this. He's going to start picking these off. This one Ultra is going to be enough to push us back. He's trying to pick off the spawning pool. Nicely done there. 5 drones and the spawning pool. Good pickoff for FanTaSy. And a lot of the supply for Solar is in these Corruptors here. Well, 3 missile turrets is a big investment for FanTaSy. I guess he floated over his main base. Taking a bit of damage at his third base, it looks like he's unloading. He's actually harassing this base as well. So Solar is not on a good economy as well. If we look at the income, FanTaSy is very far ahead, just due to the fact that he's now dropping mules on another base. So FanTaSy, he's fighting like a dog to stay alive in this game. He's picking off more and more drones with this drop. Solar's kind of been broken before in a way we've never seen him broken by a Terran player. This medivac will be picked off there. So that dropping is now ended. But FanTaSy once again moving in. This gold base, I mean the 4th and the gold are so close to each other. A fight's now going to be going down. There's not much to punish the bio, just kiting here. It would be good to see some of the tanks maybe inch forward a bit. A lot of banelings on the ground for Solar, though. This army is very close in supply. Solar, though, does have the gold base up, which is going to give him a temporary boost in economy. It won't last for too long, though. And FanTaSy taking it below at his third base once more. Liberator now going to get set up here to help defend that. FanTaSy now moving into poke. I mean, Solar's got this +3 armor, but we'll just see what he's able to do. There's not that much on the ground for Solar. There's 4 Ultras. Well, 6, actually, pardon me. There's 6 Ultras in here somewhere. There we go. The other ones are joining up now. FanTaSy poking and prodding. Wants to deny mining of the space. Really needs to deny mining of the space if he wants to hold on. He's fought so hard to come back in this game. We're going to see if he'll be able to keep that moving. He's now sending some Marauders to the north to pick off another base for Solar. I mean, both these guys are pretty much mined out. So, I mean, establishing new bases is very important. FanTaSy needs to pay attention, though. He's going to deny this base to the north. It looks like needs to pull his Marauders back. 5 Marauders is a massive loss. Maybe going to get the base. He's trading on the front, but it looks like that Solar may now just come in from both sides. FanTaSy's forced to take a fight at this point. Massive abducts going down in these Liberators. They do reposition themselves, though. A lot of siege tanks set up. More reinforcements for FanTaSy. This is a good number of units. The siege tanks doing as much damage as they can to the Ultralisk. This is a lot of Ultras, though. A lot of them are in the red, too. The tanks, they need to pop these Ultras. Most of them are very red. They are popping now. This Liberator doing as much as it can. FanTaSy kiting back. There may just be a bit too much for Solar. Both these guys so low on supply. It's just Marines now, though, versus Ultralisks. And it looks like that it's going to be too much. GG gets called. Solar manages to take the game. What a fantastic game in this Terran versus Zerg. This series is delivering. Solar taking the 2-0 lead, but FanTaSy giving us fantastic games here. I mean, that game could have gone either way. FanTaSy, I mean, I could have sworn he was dead, but then he managed to bring it back. Very well played by him, but ultimately, Solar, a bit too much. The next map is going to be Parasite, and we saw what Solar did to Bunny on this map. So we're going to see what FanTaSy is going to be able to do. Is it time for the proxy racks, I'm saying? It's got to be time, right? Time for a proxy racks if I had to say so. Alrighty, we're going to get these guys into the lobby. It's the best of 7, though. There is room for FanTaSy to come back, but if he's going to come back, I mean, reverse all sweeping Solar would be very tough, so starting a comeback now is pretty important. Alrighty, both these guys are ready. We're going to see. I mean, Solar's barreling towards taking taking his crown in Afreeca World once more. Here we are, we're heading on into the next game. It's Parasite. Alrighty, it's a best of 7. Currently up 2-0, spawning down in the bottom right. It is Solar, the monster. I don't know who we're going to find to be able to beat him. And spawning on the top left-hand side of the map, it is Dead Pixels FanTaSy. We're gonna I'm gonna sort of real talk for a minute. It's pretty amazing how we've sort of grown in these Afreeca World tournaments. If you guys tuned into the first one, which was also on the old Afreeca TV platform, I mean, it was just a smaller invitational with I mean, the caliber of players has gone up a lot. I mean, they're all very good players that we have in these tournaments, but guys like FanTaSy, I mean, he's like a champion back from the old days, and I mean, we started out with lesser established players, I guess, as far as that goes, and now we're sort of branching out. We're having a lot of really good guys in the StarCraft 2 scene. So far, Solar, though, seems to be topping it, though, dare I say, with how well he's playing. We're getting on into this next game. We'll see Parasite's a very large map. FanTaSy did manage to beat sort of on this map, though, and that allowed him to tie up the series. So we're going to see. I feel as if Solar may be tougher to do the same thing than he did to sort of. Like, I feel as if Solar is going to be a lot more relentless with the counterattack. FanTaSy getting up that factory. CC on the way. Nothing out of the ordinary there. He's gonna have his Reaper pop out. We'll see if he sends it right across the map or if he's gonna scout out with it. Looks like he is gonna scout out with it a little bit. Not very trusting of Solar. So now we'll have to see Solar taking that quick third base. I mean, I wanted to see a proxy Rax on this map. If we look at Solar's vision, he would have been caught off guard by a proxy Rax. I mean, you can't knock him for not doing it though. But I'd like to see FanTaSy go for something very aggressive to try and topple Solar, because Solar is such a monster in the late game. I mean, we saw how hard FanTaSy was working, and Solar was keeping up in that last game. A lone Hellion is on the way. Getting out the 2 Marines first. Interesting choice by FanTaSy. Maybe just for safety. Or getting out the 2 Marines. I want to see, can you put an SCV here and have it give high ground vision? This is sort of one of the newer tricks on some of the maps. So I'd like to see, can a Marine? Or I guess it's going to be a Medivac, so it is going to be aggression coming out of FanTaSy here. Medivac and an Armory on the way. Hellions are being produced, but not really being shown. They're now moving out. Pneumatized Carapace is on the way. So Solar is going to be scouting this out. Maybe a little bit too little, too late, though. We'll see, is FanTaSy going to bother unloading to kill this Overlord? No, he's not. Good choice, because it's now a very quick Overlord, and he wouldn't have been able to catch it. More Hellions need to be on the way for FanTaSy. They're the best reinforcements as they cross the map and can transform quickly. Now we're going to see how Solar going to be able to deal with this attack. This is a very aggressive attack coming out of FanTaSy. Is Solar going to be able to hold on? It's one of these Medivac Hellbat variants. The Reaper's Grenade is going to be very critical, going to bounce these forward. You now see these Hellbats moving forward. The Marines offer a lot of DPS versus the Queens. One of the Queens is going to go down. Nicely done by FanTaSy. This Medivac is still alive. The Hellbat's taking a lot of damage here, but the Medivac keeping him alive. Very well done. That healing ray, keeping that Hellbat on the front alive so well. FanTaSy now fighting into the Spine Crawler. That was a little bit concerning. He's now moving up towards the third base, which I think is a good call. Medivac's now gone, though. So he's now in a bit of trouble. A lot of the Queens are very weak. The Spine's going to reposition for Solar, which is a little bit risky. This army could probably focus it down. And I think FanTaSy is going to do just that, so a bit of a misstep by Solar. The Spine's going to get transfused once, but I think it can get focused down, and it is going to go down. Now, these Queens are very weak. This army is very injured. FanTaSy is transitioning to a Banshee behind this. He's now trading to the best of his ability, maybe going to try and focus down that one Queen. Banelings were morphed by Solar, but ultimately Solar did hang on. The workers are even now, though. FanTaSy is only on 2 bases, but he's done a very good job. He's now producing more Hellions, so I'm starting to think that this will be mech from FanTaSy. It's just a natural sort of step into it. We'll just have to wait and see. Now, this Overlord has spotted the fact that there's going to be Banshees on the way, so 3 spores are forced here by FanTaSy. I mean, he did good work with the Banshees versus Solar. Hellion, or that Banshee came in, got 2 drone kills, nicely done. Third base is started on location. It's a very bold move for FanTaSy, but I can really respect the fact that he's going for it. He's got the Hellions back at home to defend. A Viking is on the way as well to deny these Overlords. And we'll see. Is FanTaSy going to be playing mech? I think it should be mech here. There's a few more factories on the way. And now Solar is going to be making a Roach Warren, so it's possible he can go for Big Swell, which is sometimes done as a counterattack to these plays. A lot of Hellions are out for FanTaSy, though. Vikings out. Going to begin working on this Overlord. Hellions now moving across the map. These Banshees are finding some damage done. Nicely done there. 5 drones have gone down so far. There's no Overseer, so these Queens are being softened up. Is FanTaSy going to be going for another attack right now? These Banshees will be able to focus down the Banelings. Even just killing off drones is very nice. Getting some damage done with this attack. The Banshees can focus down the Banelings here. FanTaSy needs to be careful, though. Eats a lot of damage there. 7 drones have gone down so far, so he's not without payment here for this attack. It's another commitment, but he knocks Solar down on drones. Solar now down to 50 drones. Dropper Overlord has been made, though, here by Solar, and he's got that pneumatized carapace, so with these roaches, Roach speed will be finishing up. He's going to be able to move across the map and possibly counterattack and kill FanTaSy. FanTaSy's not making too much. He's making 2 Thors, which is very important for defending something like this, which will be coming his way. The Queens are now going to be moving on out in this Overlord. The Hellions are actually going to spot this Drop Lord. They're going to see all the Roaches here. The Hellions will get caught, though, which is a pretty big deal. No counterattack damage for FanTaSy. FanTaSy actually just GG's. Interestingly enough, I mean, he had 2 Thors coming out. I mean, it was 14 Roaches and 2 Ravagers, 6 Queens, but 2 Thors deal a lot of damage. Like, I don't know. 2 Thors, he could have made some Cyclones. I mean, that's kind of the opposite of a FanTaSy GG timing, in my opinion. Seeing as how if we look at Solar, he's not at that many units, so... Alrighty, we'll get into the next game. So, a bit of a reverse FanTaSy GG timing there, if I do say so myself, but, excuse me there. But, we will get into the next game. The next map is going to be Acid Plant. I mean, I don't think FanTaSy should have GG'd there. He would have taken a bit of damage, but 2 Thors deal a lot of damage and are very good versus low numbers of Roaches. SCVs could have been pulled to repair them. 2 Thors, 1-shot a Roach, to my knowledge, right? And so, just pop, pop, Roach dead. I would have liked to see FanTaSy try and hold on there. Maybe getting a bit flustered. I mean, was he dead? He had 2 Thors. They would have been out by the time Solar got across the map, I think. But we're going to be getting on into Acid Plant. Is it time for the Proxy 2 Rex? I wouldn't be surprised now with Solar with a 3-0 lead if he does go for something like an early pool, though. So whether FanTaSy should go for a Proxy Rex. We're getting on into it. This tournament is continuing. Thanks to everyone for tuning on into Afreeca World. We are loading on into the game. It is Acid Plant. One of these older maps. It's been a great showing on these new maps from these players. It'll be interesting in the next tournament when the players have figured them out a bit more. But this guy, the monster, going to be retaining his crown, it looks like. It is Solar. And spawning up in the top left-hand side of the map, it is Dead Pixels FanTaSy. Gonna have to fight hard to bring it back, and here comes the proxy racks. I would have liked to see it in the past game, but he's gonna be going for it this time. One behind proxy racks, or get to end the tournament, I guess, is kind of his mentality. He's moving in. I would be very shocked if Solar doesn't scout for this, honestly, though. I mean, you're behind. Yeah, pool first from Solar. He has the luxury, and is he even going to see the SCV? He didn't quite see the SCV, but I think he's well aware that this is on the way. Spawning pool first, a very good choice from Solar. This hasn't been identified by Solar, so he'll still be caught off guard a bit by this. We'll see if FanTaSy makes the mistake of revealing it, or just waits to build up for a few Marines, but the 6 Lings are on the way already. FanTaSy's gonna come in. We'll see the Lings. He may just GG, honestly. He's now gonna pull back. Solar hard countering this. Honestly, not much of a surprise. I mean, you kind of expect a proxy racks when your opponent's behind this much. Now, FanTaSy, we're going to have to see if he'll keep making Marines. He's making a factory back at home as he has gone into gas. We can hear the sounds of this drainage pipe. Here we see 5 Marines coming on in. The Lings, some of them are out on the map, possibly looking to get us around here. We don't see a bunker started for FanTaSy just yet. Solar does want to get this around, though, pick off any reinforcements that he can. I think we do need to see a bunker coming out of here for FanTaSy, or unless he's just going to float up and go home. And I think that's going to be the tech of choice. FanTaSy is going to float home, maybe land a barracks at the 3rd. He starts a CC, he starts a reactor. It's possible that FanTaSy will follow this up with, like, a double Cyclone push. Keeping the Marines alive would definitely help with something like that. That's a lot of Lings for Solar. And that's a lot of Zerglings. We're looking at 26 Lings to 7 Marines, so Solar really countering this, but he is down on the workers here. FanTaSy raising these depots. Now we'll see, what tech is FanTaSy going to go for? Is it going to be... It's got to be Hellions, right? Because there's not enough gas. There we go. FanTaSy now effectively on one base, fully saturated. Solar going to be very happy with this position. Hellions are now out, but there's so many Zerglings that FanTaSy needs to be careful. Gonna see these. Gonna have to pull one back. FanTaSy's gonna need to make a lot of Hellions if he wants to be able to deal with this. This Overlord is gonna get caught out. A bit of a mistake there by Solar. It's gonna give these Hellions a free path to drop, or it's actually gonna be the Marines he's gonna drop. There's no armory on the way. Interestingly enough, I guess he's just going to be moving out with these Hellions. Now, I mean, these Hellions, they do need to be careful because there's so many Zerglings out on the map. Ling Scout does get found. We'll see if Cloak is going to be on the cards for FanTaSy. It will indeed. He's also going to be able to transfer a few SCVs as he goes for this drop into the main base. Maybe going to be able to catch some of these Overlords here. Enough Lings back at home to defend this, though. There's also the counterattack moving out on the map, but the Hellions are coming in here. The Hellions and the Marines could maybe get something done. The Marines are actually opting to drop, but they didn't all drop there, which is a bit of a mistake by FanTaSy. Counterattack at the third base, Hellion, or at the natural of FanTaSy. Hellion's trying to fight. 3 SCVs do go down. It could have been worse, could have been better, for sure. So it's looking a little rough for our Korean Terran player, as in a second or two, Solar's really going to be hitting his stride and reach that kind of unstoppable Zerg. FanTaSy is going to be trying to use his limited tools to do what he can. I mean, these Zerglings, I mean, there's a lot of Hellions. They could possibly roast this. And this is a lot of Hellions. There's no armory, though. Just a plain old ton of Hellions. There's a lot of roaches, though, for Solar, so Hellbats won't help. So it's really going to be up to the Banshees, the dropping, to get what Solar can, because FanTaSy cannot fight this army straight up anymore. FanTaSy's starting another CC. It's a little bit bold. We'll see if... it's going to be another factory, so it will be mech. I guess FanTaSy needs to buy time in order to make... in order to get out some siege tanks, so he's going to have to keep poking and prodding with these Hellions. That Medivac is doing a good job as well, keeping FanTaSy's opponent on his toes. These Hellions can't really commit here, or else they'll be caught by the roaches. He catches a drone or two. Gets a good number. 5 drones is no small number. Banshee's cloak. There's no Overseer to actually pick him off, but they did get a bit of damage before they did cloak. So they may be able to deal with this. The Banshees are going to pick off a few of these drones. There's a Spore at the base, though. So FanTaSy needs to be careful, as there is going to be an Overseer now. Banshees need to be careful. The Overseer is going to allow them both to be picked off from the looks of it. Yeah, both the Banshees go down. 9 drones did die, but it's still looking a little rough for FanTaSy right now. He's getting up an armory. No siege tanks are on the way just yet. He's going to need to start those immediately if he's going to hold on whatever Solar throws at him next. I mean, FanTaSy is trying to make a game from this from a proxy 2 racks. That was pretty much hard countered completely. The only thing Solar could have done more is to scout it. Is Marine Drop going to pick up a Creep Tumor? Gonna have to get on out of there. These Hellions lurking. Roaches are in position, though. Solar, such a good defensive Zerg right now. FanTaSy maybe just going to have to settle for some Creep Tumors. Yes, that's all he's going to get there. Keeping the creep back is very nice. FanTaSy now getting up a siege tank or 2. He's going to need a fair few to hold on whatever Solar throws at him. This drop in Hellions on the map are doing a good job keeping Solar back. And if FanTaSy can hold on long enough, maybe he can reach that composition. Maybe he can force or sort of bait Solar into a bad fight and kill him. We'll need to see some Hellbats here to buffer for this. These tanks need to get set up right away. There we go. The Hellbats are now in position. More tanks are on the way, which is very important here. Solar not going to opt to go in that way, though. Looks like he's going to be coming in from both angles. Or change his position. 1-1 is on the way for both of these guys. However, more siege tanks coming out for FanTaSy. He needs to get these set up right away. The tank is now set up. We're going to see if Solar goes for a good old 1-2 punch. He's going for that indeed. FanTaSy, one of his tanks is not fighting in this army, so now it's pretty much just Hellbats. The Marines need to get in with this, although they're busy trying to defend these other tanks, but it looks like Solar just does way too much. He may be able to hold it as natural with all these tanks, but the third base is going to be ransacked. And with that, I think FanTaSy is going to go out. Solar once again dominating his opponent in the finals in his first match. Solar not dropping a map wins the tournament. Solar managed to take the tournament with a 4-0, which is pretty impressive when you consider the players, but FanTaSy not quite up to the caliber of a player like Solar just yet. And I don't know who I'm going to find in order to beat Solar, because, I mean, I try and dethrone the current champ every now and then when it comes to who we invite to the tournament. Like, I mean, if someone wins so many times, like, I had a hard time finding someone to beat a Laser way back, but we'll try and find someone who Solar can't quite get a 3-0 or a 4-0 on. Someone who's up to the task. But thanks everyone for supporting Afreeca World. Our next one is going to be the 20th, which is pretty exciting, actually. The fact that we'll be having done 20 of these events. Thanks to Afreeca for supporting it. Thanks to everyone for coming out to watch. You can follow me on Twitter. You can follow me pretty much everywhere at LaughNgamez, YouTube, LaughNgamez. But yeah, thanks to everyone for coming out to watch, and I appreciate it. I shall see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.